Good morning, everyone. Good morning, respected director sir, and all the respected faculties and dear students. So I will be starting my CGR for which is scheduled for today. Topic I have kept as appearances are deceptive, and I hope that at the end of my presentation, each one of you will understand why I have kept this title. So we'll start with a patient profile. J, 15-year girl child, coming from barmaid and informant our parents and reliability is good. Child was right-handed. She presented to us with chief complaints of abnormal movements of the right upper and lower limb 8 days back, weakness of the right side of the body since 8 days, and increased sleepiness and lethargy since 2 days prior to admission. So, going to the history of presenting illness, apparently well before 8 days, child had abnormal paroxysmal event in form of it was sudden onset while she was sleeping in the form of tonic-clonic movements of right upper and lower limbs, which has involved later all four limbs. Associated with deviation of eyes to the right, there was no bowel and bladder incontinence, and it has aborted spontaneously within 2 to 3 minutes. Parents faintly remember that she slept in night complaining about headache to parents. Parents also noticed weakness of right upper and lower limb following the seizure. The same day, parents noticed this thing as soon as the seizure was terminated. It, this weakness was sudden in onset and it was maximum at onset, associated with deviation of angle of mouth and difficulty in speaking. However, the child was able to understand with the whatever the parents are saying to her. No history suggestive of any other cranial nerve involvement. After 4 days, parents noticed that the child continues to remain excessively sleepy and with persisting hemiparesis, which has occurred at the after the seizure. And also, child was complaining to have headache, which is persisting and ongoing. It is not relieving. No history of difficulty in swallowing, no history of inability to turn neck side to side, no history of vomiting, neck stiffness, neck pain, no history of chest pain, difficulty in breathing, palpitations, no history of contact with TB patient, no history of rashes, joint pain, oral ulcer, photosensitivity, no history of progressive pallor, easy fatigability, or history of recurrent episodes of syncope in past or loss of vision. Uh, no history of bony pains, chest pain, digital pains, or digital ulcers. There was a significant past history in this child, which we have elicited. So, child's illness started at 1.5 years of age, and she used to get this type of focal seizures, and they are right focal seizures as per parents lasted this, which last every time for 2 to 5 minutes maximum and aborts spontaneously. First episode was associated with weakness of right upper and lower limb, which improved within next 3 days. So this first episode occurred at 1.5 years of age. Second episode of seizure at occurred at 6 years of age. Again, it was right focal and onset, and uh, at this time, child was on valproate, and after that, she used to develop this type of episodes almost every 3 to 4 months, one episode, and every time she develops this type of episode, antiepileptic drugs are increased or other antiepileptic drugs has been added to the prescription. History of recurrent episodes of headache associated with nausea sometimes and it improves after sleep. Usually it lasts for 6 hours to 24 hours, and this headache was there from last 3 to 4 years. Immunization was incomplete and child was immunized up to 9 months of age. Development was age appropriate and child studies in ninth standard. Family history, a significant history was a presence of migrainous headache in mother from the age of 10 to 15 years when she was 10 to 15 years, mother. So no history of motion sickness in any other family members or headache. So to summarize, so this child's timeline is so she at 1.5 years she developed right-sided focal seizures followed by right-sided weakness, which has improved within 3 to 4 days. Child remained asymptomatic till 6 years, and after that she used to develop the similar kinds of episodes with all precedes by right focal seizures. There is hemiparesis, which improves on its own in 3 to 4 days, and child was tried on valproate and other AEDs. Doses has been increased, and other AEDs which were added and then tapered, then again added as the episodes are happening. At 15 years, they came to us almost 3 months back to AIMS Jodhpur, and she presented with seizures, right-sided hemiparesis with right human facial palsy. On examination, posture was right lower limb externally rotated, well built, well nourished, no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, pedal edema, lymphadenopathy. Vitals were stable, anthropometry was normal, no neurocutaneous markers. Higher mental functions, child was conscious, speech, comprehension was preserved, although repetition and word output was impaired. Child was able to speak few words, but with difficulty. Cranial nerve examination, seventh nerve examination, frowning of eyebrows present, able to close eyelids firmly, nasolabial folds absent on right, and angle of mouth deviated to left, suggestive of UMN type of right UMN type seventh nerve palsy. The rest of cranial nerve examination is normal, fundus was normal. Gait could not be assessed. Bulk symmetrical on both sides. Hypotonia is there on right upper and lower limbs. Power was 1/5 on right side and almost 4/5 on left side, although the child was not cooperative at that point. It was normal in the left side. Superficial reflexes was normal, plantar, bilateral flexor, no primitive reflexes or clonus, no cerebellar signs, extrapyramidal movements or signs of raised ICP. Other systemic examination was essentially normal. So coming to the database of this child, so we have a 15-year-old girl, right-sided focal epilepsy, history of recurrent headaches, history of right-sided hemiparesis every time she gets seizures, and which improves, normal perinatal history, family history of migraine, and on examination, normal head circumference, no skin and hair changes, no organomegaly, no vision or hearing impairment, normal fundus, right hemiparesis, and right human facial nerve palsy. So syndromic diagnosis, or you can say clinical diagnosis, was right focal epilepsy with recurrent migrainous headaches with right-sided hemiparesis at present with right human facial nerve palsy. So anytime we get hemiparesis preceded by seizure or not, and if it is persisting more than 3 days, we used to think in lines of strokes. Then but in this child, there was history of recurrent episodes of seizures followed by this hemiparesis, which recovers. So first possibility, we have thought there is something going on in her left hemisphere, and which is causing recurrent seizures, and child gets, after seizures, child gets this weakness, which improves on its own. And another possibility we have kept is vasculopathies like moyamoya. However, it is very atypical to have only one-sided seizures and normal development and no large vessel stroke till 15 years of age, when onset is at 1.5 years of age. Other possibilities we have kept is ATP1A2 and ATP1A3 related disorders, which are nothing but mimics of channelopathies, in view of strong clinical possibility of hemiplegic migraine. And other possibilities being focal epilepsy with Todd's paresis. So we all know Todd's paresis can last up to 24 to 48 hours after focal seizures, but in certain conditions like GLUT1 deficiency, Todd's paresis can last for longer periods, maybe up to 1 week or 2 weeks. So and another possibility which we have kept is channelopathies. So all these calcium channels, sodium channels can cause this focal epilepsy and this similar kind of phenotype. So we have gone ahead with MRI, and MRI has shown this. We can appreciate there is right-sided cortical fullness is there. Left-sided cortical fullness is there compared to right. This appears swollen, this cortical gray matter. This is a FLAIR image. We can appreciate this thing in both of these images, that this left-sided gray matter appears swollen, which we have also confirmed on the diffusion imaging, which is showing this cortical gray matter diffusion restriction, suggestive of cortical gray matter edema. EEG has showed left hemispheric. So these blue lines are left hemisphere, which is depicted by odd leads. and this red lines are red lines. These red lines are depicted by the even leads. So you can easily appreciate. One can easily appreciate there is a significant asymmetry in the background. Left side being slow and low voltage. So, suggestive of something. This left hemispheric abnormality is there. So again, we we have seen this timeline. So after this workup, this initial workup of MRI and EEG, by which we have ruled out conditions like moya or some structural focal deficits, we were pretty sure that we were dealing with a condition like hemiplegic migraine, because in literature suggests that this type of MRI findings, EEG findings, clinical history can be present in hemiplegic migraine or any other channelopathy. So our clinical strong possibility was hemiplegic migraine at this point of time. We have, because of edema, edema is there is weakness persisting for beyond, and child was little sleep, you can say stuporous at that point of time, and we have gone ahead with pulse steroids to decrease the edema. As it was well depicted in literature that for acute attacks, severe attacks, we use pulse steroids. For further prevention of these type of attacks, we have added topiramate and flunarizine. We have gone with genetic analysis, which has confirmed our suspicion, and this mutation came positive for the condition of familial hemiplegic migraine 2. So what is familial hemiplegic migraine? So FHM is a rare channelopathy. The average of onset is 12 to 17 years, but range can be 1 to 51 years. Characterized by migraine attacks that include motor weakness during the aura phase. So one should understand that whatever weakness is happening, this is mainly aura, and seizures can also occur in aura in these hemiplegic migraines. Attacks may variably include severe headaches, scintillating scotoma, visual field defects, numbness, paresthesias, unilateral weakness, aphasia. Fever can also be there. So don't be fooled by the presence of fever. So if history is recurrent and it is from early childhood, one should have this suspicion. Lethargy, coma, and seizures. Motor aura is the hallmark of hemiplegic migraine, but is never the only type of aura. The symptoms can last for hours to days or rarely weeks, but most resolve completely. In unusual cases, reversible hemiplegia can last up to 4 weeks. In between attacks, most patients have a normal neurological examination, like in our child, according to history. In severe cases, the encephalopathy can manifest as confusion, agitation, delusion, somnolence, or deep coma. As like in our parents were very categorical about increased sleepiness in the child. Seizures, fever, meningismus, CSF, pleocytosis, cerebral edema, or cerebral infarction has been reported in the past. ATP1A2 mutations causes frequent and long-lasting hemiplegia, recurrent coma, or seizures with intellectual disability. So if we don't treat this condition and if the attacks are severe, they can result in long-lasting disability in form of intellectual disability, in form of hemiparesis. So one should remember there is need of treatment. If you don't treat this episode, if you don't take care of this episode, and also morbidity occurs because of inadvertent use of anti-epileptics, which causes lot of side effects in the child. Cerebellar involvement also been described in some patients with FHM2. Neuroimaging is mostly normal, but whatever we got in this child, it has been reported in literature that we can get such findings like cortical edema and cortical or meningeal enhancement contralateral to the hemiparesis. Coming to diagnostic criteria for hemiplegic migraines, headaches that fulfill criteria for migraine with aura consisting of both of following: transient, generally greater than 72 hours, but may be prolonged, but fully reversible motor weakness, fully reversible visual, sensory, and or speech language symptoms. Hemiplegic migraines is categorized as familial if at least one first-degree relative, that is parent, sib, or offspring, or second-degree relative has similar attacks that fulfill the diagnostic criteria for hemiplegic migraine. So acute management of severe attacks. So whenever attacks are severe, what do you mean by severe? So if the headache is persisting, seizures are there, hemiplegia has occurred and it is not improving, coma, and if brain edema is present on MRI, like in our child. So acute attack has to be dealt with pulse steroid therapy. And what is abortive and preventive medications for this condition? And they are very, very effective. So whenever you suspect this condition, clinically also, if you are not able to do genetic confirmation, you can start the child on topiramate, which is an excellent drug because it causes seizure control, it causes headache control, and it is very good for this type of channelopathy-like disorders. And for familial hemiplegic migraine, if you are confirmed in a family it is running this condition, already parents are affected and diagnosis has been proven, then child is coming with similar complaints, acetazolamide is very useful for preventing further attacks. So this is the child. One can see, so this is the recent video of this child. Now almost there is lesser swing which we can observe on the right side, but mostly the child has improved. There is complete improvement. This is a recent video which we have asked from the child from the home. So another case which is of similar kind, but there's different phenotypic expression. And we'll go ahead with this case very in brief. So 3-year girl, resident of Jaipur, recurrent episodes of focal seizures with post-ictal irritability and transient hemiparesis from 12 months of age. So there, 1-year girl, there was mild motor delay, non-contributory family history, right focal seizure for 5 minutes at 1 year of age, and there was right hemiparesis which has improved in 3 days. And from 1 year, 3 months of age, child started having multiple brief right, left. So there was alternating seizures, focal seizures, 1 to 3 per month. And every time the child have this type of seizures has hemiparesis, which used to relieve in sleep. Carbamazepine was added, but to the no effect, and dose has been increased consistently. As there was no relief, they have seek our consultation here, and at 3 years they have presented to us. Birth history, full-term normal vaginal delivery, birth weight was 2.6 kg, cried immediately after birth, smooth perinatal transition, immunization, dietary and family history was non-contributory, and developmental history, other than mild motor delay, everything was normal in the child. Examination, anthropometry was normal, general physical examination, no neurocutaneous markers, skin, hair normal, spine normal. Neurological examination was essentially normal, child was active, conscious, oriented, no focal deficits, and systemic examination also did not reveal any significant findings. So again, coming to the child's database, 3-year girl, epilepsy was there, recurrent transient focal motor deficits was there, and it was right as well as left. Normal perinatal history, mild motor delay, family history not contributory. On examination, normal head circumference, no skin and hair changes, no organomegaly, no vision hearing impairment, normal fundus. So again, syndromic diagnosis for this child is focal epilepsy with recurrent alternating hemiparesis. So differential diagnosis we have kept for this child is focal epilepsy with Todd's paresis, as we have discussed in the previous case that GLUT1 can cause prolonged hemiparesis episodes. But other than GLUT1, pyridoxine dependency also comes into the play in this particular child because the age is less and the onset of the seizures are less. So both of these conditions can cause prolonged Todd's paresis. Vasculopathy like moya, early presentation. Then again, we have kept ATP1A3, ATP1A2 related disorders, which are the mimics, nothing but mimics of channelopathies and actual channelopathies, which are calcium or sodium channelopathies, which can present like this. So they have come to us at 3 years of age. MRI and MRI brain were normal. EEG has revealed some focal discharges. Possibility of with this characteristic history and with the prior knowledge of high, and we have kept a high suspicion for again this channelopathy or channelopathic like disorder. We have entertained the possibility of alternating hemiplegia of childhood. Child was started on topiramate and other ADs were tapered and stopped. Mutation was sent, which has turned out positive again. So we can see this ATP183, which has come out positive in this child, and it is a pathogenic mutation. Presently, child is 3 years, 4 months of age, and last 4 months she did not have any further episode of seizures. So what is alternating hemiplegia of childhood? So it was first proposed in 1971 by Verrett and Steele. So they have described 8 patients who suffer an unusual symptom complex of intermittent alternating hemiplegia. Symptoms have begun in early childhood, and in one child, the onset was at the age of 3 months. Recovery is usual within several hours, but may be prolonged over several days. As these children have matured, attacks have become less frequent, and in some, a more characteristic picture of migraine has emerged. So one should understand all these channelopathies and channelopathic like disorders, they are acting as precursors of migraine, and history of migraine has to be elicited in parents, family caregivers. So there is a strong association of migrainous headaches with this type of disorders. And if you don't get history of migraine, also ask history of motion sickness. So which also tells if any family members is having excessive motion sickness, they are also taken as positive family history for this type of symptoms. So alternating hemiplegia of childhood diagnostic criteria was laid in 1993. Onset before 18 months of age, occurrence of hemiplegia, tonic or dystonic attacks, nystagmus, dyspnea, and other autonomic phenomena. And all these symptoms are transient and reversible, and they can take up to week or sometimes months, but they all will be reversible. Disappearance of these symptoms with sleep and reappearance 10 to 20 minutes after awakening. So this is a very common phenomena. In sleep, these all symptoms will disappear. Episodes of quadriplegia can also occur. So one should remember the name is hemiplegia or hemiplegic migraine in the previous case, but episodes of quadriplegia can also occur. Development of cognitive impairment and of a chorioathletic movement. So if you don't identify this condition, don't treat this disorder, don't prevent this further attacks, child is bound to have cognitive impairment and permanent chorioathletic movement disorder. So coming to pathophysiology of both, which can be template for the both type of disorders. So there is a mutation happening in ATP1A3 or 1A2. So both of these can result in failure of sodium potassium ATPase, which is working in brain, and because of that there is a state of hyperexcitability in neurons, and they are prone for throwing seizures and all sort of neurological abnormalities, hemiparesis. So this thing is occurring because of failure of ATP1A3 or 1A2. What are the usual clinical phases of ASC? So it can start as early as 1 to 3 months of age, and at that time only features noticed are abnormal ocular movements and dystonias. And phase 2 lasts from 4 months to 6 years. Hemiplegic spells begin. Possible loss of developmental milestone occurs. Seizures may occur. And after 6 years of age, persistent and developmental delay sets in. Fixed neurological abnormalities, less frequent hemiplegic and dystonic attacks. So one should understand that we should identify this type of disorder in this phase 2. If we don't identify here, persistent developmental delay bound to happen, fixed neurological abnormalities bound to happen, and and this hemiplegic attacks, characteristic hemiplegic attacks will wane off. So this is the target age we should identify this disorder. And what are the characteristics of hemiplegia which can occur in both of these conditions? Premonitory signs prior to paroxysmal phenomena, headaches and vomitings. Fluctuations can occur. Accompanied symptoms are skin color changes, paleness, flushing, or sometimes cyanosis can occur. Meiosis or mydriasis can be a feature, and excessive sweating. So some features suggestive of autonomic dysfunction. These two genetic variants, which we have discussed and we have seen in the both patients, one is ASC1 and one is ASC2. ASC1 is described in first time in 2004 and ASC2 was described in 2012. And ASC1 occurs usually due to mutations in ATP1A2 gene, which is the same gene for hemiplegic migraine, and ASC2 occurs because of mutations in ATP1A3 gene. These are both the isoforms of sodium potassium ATPase gene. So there is something which our cardiology counterparts should be knowing or should be aware about, or we should also be aware as neurologists, that these children are prone for cardiac abnormality, especially rhythm abnormalities. There is a large cohort which have been studied longitudinally. So 53% exhibited abnormal resting 12 DCGs, and long-term cardio surveillance in this alternating hemiplegia is strongly recommended. Coming to the atypical presentations, so benign familial nocturnal ASC is one where hemiplegia occurs only upon awakening, present in a first degree relative and with normal development. Then is mild ASC, then dystonia predominant ASC, or autosomal dominant ASC, then late onset ASC, which occurs onset occurs after 18 months of age, and ASC with quadriparesis. So I have seen such cases and I have published in past, and all my cases have excellent outcome. So this is a very rewarding condition to identify and treat in pediatric age group. We should be aware about other ATP1A3 related disorders, which are mainly seen by our adult counterparts, which is one is CAPOS, which stands for cerebellar ataxia, areflexia, pes cavus, optic atrophy, and sensory neural hearing loss, and rapid onset dystonia Parkinsonism. Therapeutic options available for these all type of channelopathies and channelopathies like conditions are, one is flunarizine associated with best therapeutic results, and if flunarizine is not working, topiramate is one drug which I have found very effective whenever I have faced any difficulty with flunarizine administration. Ketogenic diet is another option which needs to be tried in refractory cases of channelopathies. What are the advantages of early diagnosis? So it may avoid life-threatening plegic episodes and status epilepticus. Reduced recurrence of plegic episodes can be there. Then avoidance of unnecessary cumbersome battery of investigations whenever the child develops this type of hemiplegia. So whenever we all know that whenever hemiplegia occurs or hemiparesis occurs, all sort of MRI or stroke workup starts. We start workup. So if you know the diagnosis, this battery of investigations can be avoided, and targeted genetic testing and treatment avoids unwanted side effects of multiple anti-epileptic drugs, which is a very important aspect to identification of such disorders. So heterogeneous group of disorders resulting from dysfunction of ion channels, movements, and ion movements located in the membranes, and there is wide variety of phenotypes. This is especially I want to highlight for the residents and undergraduates. So it can cause all sort of neurological abnormalities ranging from epilepsy syndromes, movement disorders, alternating hemiplegia of childhood, hemiplegic migraine, and myotonias. When you should think about channelopathies and channelopathy-like disorders, so whenever severe symptoms are there in presence of relatively normal cognitive development, and these are episodic presentations with recovery to the baseline. Specific clinical syndrome, age specific, if you identify, that is very good based on the clinical features which I have listed in the previous slides. And many have specific recognized triggers and relieving factors. So there is a peculiarity about all these channelopathies and channelopathies-like disorders. They recover in sleep. Usually strokes are more common in sleep and on awakening, but these disorders recovers in sleep. So this is a very important clue. What is the long-term outcome? So there is a largest cohort which have been studied prospectively, where they have studied in 7 out of 157 patients with this condition, sudden death occurred, 3 of which were during epileptic seizures, with 1 death occurring during a prolonged plegic attack. Paroxysmal episodes decrease with age, Early starting of specific therapy improves morbidity and mortality, and it is without doubt related with future migraine. So take-home messages from my presentation for today is the type, the duration, and the severity of the symptoms are specific for each individual with ASC and hemiplegic migraine. So symptoms and duration can vary individual to individual with the same mutation. So one should remember the severity can vary. Suspect channelopathies whenever episodic symptoms are present. And very important point for residents and UG students that not all hemiparesis are strokes. So we all know that children are not miniature adults. So in children, there are many conditions which can cause hemiparesis other than strokes. So one should be aware about them. Suspect ASC in presence of recurrent hemiparesis and normal neuroimaging. Presence of migraine in family is a very strong clue. Cardiac screening and follow-up is very mandatory, which we should be doing in all our children with channelopathies. And coming to the last point, that genetic advances has been proven to be paradigm shift in management of pediatric neurological disorders like this two entities. If there is no confirmation about genetics, we will be not confident giving these type of therapies and for long. So, with the meticulous history and high index suspicion, we can successfully unmask all these type of masqueraders. Thank you. So I am here for any doubts or any questions which I can address.
Lokesh, this is Professor Puranik. A very really interesting case, and very interesting to know that cause of hemiparesis could be can present as a migraine, and it's a familial or hereditary affection is there, and some genetic abnormalities are there causing hemiparesis. What is the view of a neurologist? I would like to know about such cases. One. And second thing is, what is the battery of investigations you really, the protocol you follow for the migrainous investigation?
Yes, sir. So, sir, like these conditions comes to our mind when all the routine causes has been ruled out. So one should we will be very clear that uh, these are diagnosis of exclusion. We will think out of the box when all the routine investigations are not suggestive of routine conditions like strokes, moya, structural defects. So then only this condition will come in play, and we should have this suspicion that with this characteristic pattern of history. And uh, sir, what was the second question?
The battery of investigation you recommend for.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, sir, whenever the child comes in acute state and if the child is sick, all come sort of detailed neurological examination history is must. And after that, we will do neuroimaging first because uh, even like we have in past we were overconfident in certain cases that we are dealing with channelopathies, but it is nothing but some structural defect. So neuroimaging has to be done first. If there is no neuroimaging available for the child, then EEG will be of great help because certain times we can get this type of persistent hemiparesis, altered sensorium in cases of non-convulsive status also. So that has to be ruled out. And after that, when we are thinking about migraines in the family, and so we do rule out like any ocular abnormalities are there. Then other than that, no, like we don't usually rule out any metabolic conditions or so we don't do TMS, GCMS for these type of conditions if our suspicion for channelopathies is high. So we directly go towards clinical exome analysis, and which usually will, if we are right, we usually will get the genetic pathogenic variants positive. Sir, Naveen sir, please sir.
Thanks. Lovely presentation, Dr. Lokesh. So, since you also presented a brief video during your presentation,
Yes, sir.
could you help all of us understand what are the do's and don'ts before we share any patient identifying information or videos or photographs
Yes.
in a presentation which is public? I'm sure you've taken all the precautions, but
Yes,
just for a larger understanding from all of us, could you help us share understand the best practices on this?
Yes, sir. So most important is, sir, we should be having our consent form ready whenever the child is getting admitted. So usually we do such practice that whenever the child is getting admitted, for any patient getting admitted, we take consent at the onset itself. In the file itself, it has been embedded that this clinical material can be used for certain presentation. That is one thing. And if we are asking for video or an image of a child or any particular like any body part of the child, we take this consent from the parents usually, not from the child. If the child is above 14 years, we also ask the child. So this is our routine practice, and consent has to be taken. Without consent, should not share this photo or videos anywhere. And most of the, in fact, even if we want to publish this case or we want to show there in some conference, this consent is mandatory, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, sir, if
so hi, Dr. Lokesh.
yes, sir.
So in how many cases do maybe family history may be absent? Or in this, suppose child is coming first time with some hemiplegia and early hours, so imaging may be normal. So how to take precautions to go in the wrong direction?
So in first episode, we should not make this diagnosis. That is very, very clear. So in first episode, we should evaluate all cases with hemiparesis as strokes. So that has to be done. That is mandatory, and we should rule out stroke. My presentation should not give the wrong idea that all hemiparesis cannot be stroke. It has to be ruled out at admission if it is the first episode. And if it is happening again and again, and if all previous MRIs are normal, then you can think of this alternate possibility at the onset. Otherwise, you will be dealing the child as any other case with hemiparesis.
Okay, thank you. In how many cases family history may be absent?
Family history can be absent in men, because it is autosomal dominant disorder, and it is clearly stated. If family history is present, it is called familial hemiplegic migraine. Otherwise, the entities are hemiplegic migraine and alternating hemiplegia of childhood.
Okay, thank you.
If any other query, otherwise we can end the presentation. Thank you.